Good morning. I will get us started for today. My name is Gayla King, and I'm the Regional Faith Organizer with the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity based in Northern California. So today we have a really important conversation that we're looking forward to having with you all. We know that this upcoming election is very crucial, an important opportunity for us to be voting with our values. As we've all witnessed the harm to our communities from the federal level with policies and practices, it's important now more than ever that we strengthen our state and our local policies and practices. We also know as an organization that no matter what the outcome is on November 3rd, our work to end the criminalization of immigrants and the criminalization of Black and Brown community members will go on beyond this election. So for today, for the next hour and a half, this webinar is really an opportunity to hear about a few of the key state propositions that we looked at that we felt really aligned with our work and our values, and to create a space for you all to hear from some of the members of our organization, from some of our partners, and from community members who are directly impacted by these policies and propositions. So the flow for today, we're going to first hear from Reverend Deborah Lee, our Executive Director, who will lead us in a spiritual centering and share some faith reflections, getting us ready for this conversation on the election. And then I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Reverend Larry Foy, who's our Justice Not Jails coordinator in Los Angeles. And he will be introducing 3 of the criminal justice propositions that we have taken a position on. And he will also introduce some partners and community members to share their reflections as well. And after those speakers, you'll get a chance to ask questions, and please use the chat. And if possible, direct the questions to me so that I can sort of see what the questions are and help moderate the questions with the speakers. And then towards the end, I'll share a little bit more about the other 4 propositions that we've taken a position on, and then we'll close with sharing resources and hearing another testimony from one of our community leaders. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reverend Deborah Lee.
I wanted to just start off by us taking a moment to spiritually center ourselves, which I feel like in this day and time is a real gift. It's a gift that we can give to ourselves. So I want to invite you, you could look at this photo that I found, that I took. It's actually in a junkyard near my house, a junkyard that has now been overgrown with flowers and art that community people have added to it. Or you could look at another photo that's perhaps around your own computer this morning. And I just invite you to notice something beautiful around you. Notice what stands out to you in the photograph that you choose or the image. Notice the detail. Notice the color. Notice what feeling you might be feeling in your own bodies. Notice any place in your body that you might be feeling, for whatever reasons around us or around you, any place in your body that you might be feeling anxiety or stress or distraction or confusion or pain or ease. And I invite you to just breathe into that area. Breathe into that place in your own physical body, because we are bodies. You can place your hand on that area if you'd like, and notice, how does that touch feel? And take a few more deep breaths just to breathe into this place and breathe into that area. With your breath, breathing in connection, Breathing in assurance, breathing in love and care today. Thank you. Well, welcome back. I'd like to just formally welcome everyone here to the webinar today. And the Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity in California is an organization that harnesses the power of people of all faith backgrounds and community partners to use their leadership to advance social justice, racial equity, and human rights, where the wholeness and the health and humanity of all people are upheld, but in particular, Black people, Indigenous peoples, immigrants, and people of color, that their humanity and health and wholeness are fully recognized and honored. We envision a world where the sacredness of each person is upheld across all bars and all borders. And we know that we share that vision with many of you. So we thought about this election in terms of that vision and in terms of how our vote on every little measure, on every measure, can help move the needle towards our collective vision of racial equity and our shared humanity. We've looked at important propositions on the ballot. We cannot endorse particular candidates as a 501c3 organization, but we have looked at several propositions on the ballot, which are an opportunity for us to take a direct vote on important issues, a plebiscite. Many in our country and in our state are suffering right now due to the twin pandemics of racism as well as the coronavirus. And so we know that lives are at stake at this election, and our decision-making matters. So we chose our position on these propositions based on several guiding principles. And one was our interfaith values, the faith values that we uphold across different faith traditions. There are four that we'd like to lift up and remind you of today. One was upholding the dignity, sacredness, and wholeness of every human person. The second value was the moral duty to pursue justice and equity and peace. The commitment to radical inclusion, to extend our inclusion in our communities and in places where there have been exclusion and stigma, but to broaden inclusion in our whole society and our democracy. And our responsibility to act in accordance of collective accountability to one another, that we are more than just ourselves, but we are collectively accountable to one another. The second set of values that we looked at in determining our position on these propositions was our values of racial equity. Knowing that the past still affects the present and that we have to continue to undo the harms of the past and to seek policies that repair and address the systemic racial inequity that undergird so much of our society. So with that, we looked at these propositions and saw them into two. Not every proposition is here on our ballot guide, but we've lifted up these top ones, these top seven. The one that fit into the category of decarceration, which is part of that repairing the harm and expanding our democracy. And the second area is around investing in our communities, which is part of repairing decades of divestment and decades of inequality, and centering the needs of people as a form of building human security and safety. So I want to just acknowledge you may come up with different conclusions around some of these propositions, and we may not agree on every single one, and that's okay. But that we want to thank you for being here to listen more to us about why we think these propositions are so critical and so important. So thank you. I'm going to pass it on to our Justice Not Jails coordinator, Reverend Dr. Larry Foy.
Good morning, everyone. As Reverend Lee has welcomed you, I welcome you as well. Before we introduce our speakers and look at the three propositions that we really want to this morning, allow me just a couple of minutes to talk about the history of propositions in California, the history of initiatives in California. California adopted the initiative process on October 10th, 1911. becoming the 10th state, at least at that time, to participate in this form of democracy. Currently, there are about 20 to 28, I believe about 28 states who participate in this form of direct democracy. And by direct democracy, we mean to say that an initiative, a ballot measure, or in this case, a proposition is brought forth by the people through their representative legislature. In order for an initiative to get on the ballot for a vote by the people, or at least statewide, uh, it requires gathering enough signatures from registered voters. And in this case, that number, by the way, is determined by the governor's vote. Uh, that is to say that how many votes did the governor garner in the election. In any event, these three propositions that we're looking at in particular obviously garnered enough votes. So the initiative or propositions are, in most cases, born out of silent protest or public protest in reaction to some current policy that needs to be amended or changed for the betterment of the people. And it's, on the one hand, it's good to have public protests. We definitely need that because that makes the people aware. But public protests must at some point turn into policy. Otherwise, you do not get change. So as I said, in order for a proposal initiative to get on the ballot, it requires a number of signatures. Since California has been participating in this initiative, an initiative process, there have been more than at least 400 initiatives, I would submit, that have been put forth in California, with about 34% of them actually passing or becoming policy or law. Again, all three of these propositions that we're talking about met the standard. But for us, as an organization, IM4HI Integrity, we applied a values test to determine how we would vote on these initiatives or endorse these initiatives. And so as Reverend Lee mentioned earlier, we believe that every person is sacred across all borders and that they are to be treated with human dignity and respect. And then further, as an organization, as we looked at these propositions, we asked ourselves, do these propositions repair the harm done to most vulnerable people, and particularly to people of color, to communities of color, and specifically to our formerly incarcerated brothers and sisters, as well as our immigrant communities who have been affected by some of these policies. So in making our endorsement on these three proposals, we asked ourselves, does it repair the harm, or does it do more harm? So in that regard, our endorsement stems from that. And as Reverend Lee said, it may not line up with some of you, but nonetheless, as Martin Luther, Protestant reformer, once said, at least to paraphrase him, here we stand, we can do no other. So with that in mind, I want to move and introduce the first proposition that we're going to look at. Proposition 17 is yes on restoring voting rights to California parolees. And we have a wonderful person that I'd like to introduce to you. Some of you may know her, but nonetheless, I will introduce her to the rest of this body. Miss Lisa James, who is a founder of Women in Transition. And Lisa is a formerly incarcerated person, and she's going to share with us her own lived history, personal story, and her views about Prop 17. So we welcome Lisa, and you're on board, Lisa.
Thank you, Dr. Floyd. Thank you, Reverend Lee, and to all the other facilitators. I greet you and those that are joining us. It's a real honor. Hopefully you can hear me well. If not, just let me know. So my name is Lisa James. I, as Dr. Ford stated, am a formerly incarcerated woman. I'll just share a little bit about my journey and how not being able to vote coming out of prison affected me, my family. And so I'm thinking that maybe I was about 12 years old growing up in South Central Los Angeles. South Central Los Angeles, it comes with the stigmas, the movies, and what people see about LA, and, you know, where gangs and, you know, drugs and all those things exist. And pretty much a lot of it is true. I come from a family of addiction, drug and alcohol abuse. So from an early age, I began to experiment with alcohol and marijuana, and then I just graduated on as our communities begin to flood in with what ever came into our neighborhoods to just keep us absent or just disconnected from reality and from life. I didn't have the opportunities to explore the idea of having a future, to go to college and to play in sports. I mean, we watched sports and things like that, but even though I was pretty artistic and active, it was just a part of my life and the games that we played when I was growing up. It wasn't hard for me to connect with other young people that were drinking and smoking marijuana. To my surprise, I didn't really know that there were people that young that actually did it, but I ended up in this group of people. And so my journey just escalated. I had my daughter when I was 14 years old. My mom had me when she was 14 years old. So the cycle and the generational practices were being transferred from one generation to the next within my family. And so as I began to start getting progressively active and worse in my addiction, a lot of things began to start happening in my life that I didn't expect to start happening. One was the crack cocaine epidemic that came and flooded our neighborhoods like nothing we've ever seen before. As I began to start experimenting with crack cocaine and hanging out with people that did it, my environment became darker as I progressed in that. And so because of it, I found myself going in and out of jails. Because I had lost total control, I began to start fighting to try to get recovery. I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know. All I knew was that I found myself in a state of despair in my community and in my family, and I watched other people in my family going through the same thing. So we couldn't help each other. There just seemed to be no way out. So from time to time, when I went to jail, I would go to sleep for a few days. I would get maybe a felony for possession, or I would get maybe a misdemeanor for trespassing, whatever it was. It's just as if I was just zombified and just running the course. I began to ask while I was in jail for like recovery programs, like how can I get some help? And I didn't find that was available to me, but I did from time to time hear about programs like the Betty Ford Center and then other programs where you had to have money or private insurance to get that kind of help. I began to start believing that I was actually going to die in the streets that way. I did not think that there was going to be any resolve or any solution to my problem. I just felt like at some point that this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to end up. And so I pretty much just found myself lost in that state of mind. So when I did go to jail, sometimes it gave me a little bit of rest, but that was all it did. It gave me rest, and it gave me felonies, and it just, as it got progressively worse, I ultimately ended up with a case that sent me to prison. And at that time, I had finally found a program that I believe ultimately saved my life, because once programs did start opening up for a time, we still didn't, and I say we because there were so many people in that same category, we still kind of didn't understand how to escape the mentalities that we developed. We didn't know how to escape from the practices that we had learned. We didn't know how to gravitate to these ideas of what life and normal, you know, and the norm, what the norm looked like. So it was complicated. And this was over a span of about 20 years for me that I stayed in and out, going back and forth, trying to get sober, trying to stay out of jail, having babies. I got married a couple of times. It was just a revolving door and a cycle that I just couldn't seem to get out of. And my mind was just in a place where it was in such despair, where it was as if my life was just a hopeless life where I was just merely existing. And I had come to that conclusion. And so it really amazes me how when I did go to prison from the program, because I still had this stuff that was haunting me from my past, that I had to go and deal with some of that stuff in court. And lo and behold, regardless of the fact that I had found a program that I knew had gotten me to the point of where I had gotten 2 months of continuous strong sobriety, that I ended up still going to prison. And so coming out of prison, I thought, okay, when I went into prison, I thought, okay, this is not something that I've done before. I know that there were women that were going in and out, but my mentality was, let me make the best of this. Let me try to learn whatever it is I need to learn so that I can go back to recovery. Because in my heart, in the reality, I knew that if I went back to where I came from, leaving that prison, that was going to be another reprieve, and that I was going to find myself back on the streets. I knew it. I absolutely did not doubt it. I just felt it. And so I requested to go back to LA to the program. I didn't go back to the program. They did let me go back to LA, but I went into recovery. And as I left the prison, I had all these plans. I thought, when I get out, I'm going to be able to get back into society. I'm going to be able to participate in, you know, my community, and, you know, I can, you know, my life is going to get better. I can start building relationships with my kids. And that was not my reality. I thought if I got a house, you know, an apartment, got a job, and all these things, that good things would happen for me. The first thing that happened was I was able to get into a program that gave me a bed, that gave me somewhere to lay my head so that I can continue to go to meetings, because I left prison going straight into a meeting. And I had this feeling of hope. I remember feeling like, even though I was afraid because I was on parole and I had never been on parole before, and parole was a lot different from probation. Probation, I was able to just report once a month, and as long as I didn't get in trouble, I would be okay. But parole was more like still being in jail. And the stipulations were more harsh, but the resources did not exist. But there were all these things that parole wanted me to do, but they weren't willing to help me, and there's no funding for it, just figure it out kind of stuff was happening. And at that point, I realized why people were going back and forth to prison. And so I just did whatever I had to try to figure it out, because I knew I didn't want to go back to prison. I didn't want what I had. I just wanted my life to get better. And I wanted to register to vote. I just figured that I could psych myself into believing that I was entering into a society that will ultimately forgive me as long as I practice more positive things moving forward. And that was not the case, because as I began to start getting more involved in paying attention to laws that were being put in place, like the war on drugs that came in during this crack cocaine epidemic. And a lot of it happened because there were crack babies that were being born, and it was like the hammer had came down on our communities, on low income communities living in poverty that were stricken by this crack and these drugs that just swept through our families and divided us and separated us and just literally torn us apart. But it didn't dawn on me until I actually began to look at legislation, how these laws were being structured deliberately to cause an even deeper demise of our communities, instead of bringing in services and support that would help us to be able to heal and to find structure and to teach us to raise our, to utilize our powers and our voices. And as I looked at it, I thought, wow, this is hard to believe that there are actually people that do not want to see our communities restored. Oppression, and I found that out as I began to start taking this journey through life and fighting to overcome one barrier at a time. And one being that the minute I got out, to my surprise, Section 8 had sent a letter to an old address that I lived at, and that I would actually used. And I immediately got in touch with them, and they said, yeah, great, we'll open the case back up. It's only been a few days. I'm thinking, wow, I'm about to get Section 8, an opportunity to get a place so that I can get my kids and this and that. But my felony prevented that. When they ran the background check, they were like, oh, we can't give you, we can't do this. And so, and then at the time there was the food stamps, and then there was child support and a massive $40,000. So whenever I did find myself trying to get a job later on, that happened. So I had to try to figure it out by doing independent type contracting and stuff like that to try to make ends meet. But in my despair, I was like, how am I ever going to be able to be a mother? How am I ever going to be able to go to court and say, this is what I'm doing and get my kids back? It just ultimately, had I grabbed hold of the hopelessness that I was facing, I don't think I wouldn't have made it. I would have just fallen apart. And that happened from time to time. But going on to the idea, as I got a little bit into connected to the political advocacy work, I wanted to learn how to matter, because it didn't feel like I did at all, because I couldn't vote on parole. I couldn't register to vote. And now when you do stuff like that, they consider it a crime. People get fines and penalties for registering to vote if they are on parole, or if they're in states where it's a felony to do that. And so I realized, as I began to start looking over the course of history and how we've been a part of this oppression from a long time ago, that there was something there. I can say that today, when I look at my life, when I look at myself, and I look at my life, and I look at my tenacity, And I look at how, even though I still face these barriers, that there are so many that I've overcome, that there were strengths that I have grabbed hold of that I didn't know I had. I'm a mother to my kids, even when it's not, you know, a pretty picture, even when they're still dealing with their pain, and I'm working with them through their pain and working through myself through my pain and all these other things that came along with the oppression. Like, there's not just the fact that we have these laws that are fighting against us and causing us to just to feel so defeated from time to time, that there's other stuff going on when it comes to the healing processes to help me overcome the things that I've suffered and the pains that I've caused, and my accountability in my life. And when I look at Proposition 17, I think, wow, this is what I needed back then, because I remember when I first registered to vote and I voted for Barack Obama, I wanted to wear my little sticker like forever. I even put that sticker in my little voting paper in my photo album, because the feeling that I got, it was like, wow, now I can finally participate in something powerful. And I think that one of the stigmas that go along with mass incarceration and folks that have been to prison and folks that are that are in jail right now, that are in county jails that can still register and vote, there's this stigma that will never be good enough. We'll never have the mentality that we need to want to see democracy happen and want to see great things happen in our communities and participate in positive and being a positive influence in the lives of those that come after us, or, you know, and that's just not true. As we begin to recover and we begin to heal and we begin to start looking at how our world is being shaped and how oppression is a deliberate attack against communities and people of color, immigration, and like, when you look at these things for what they are, there's no explanation and there's just no reasoning for it. Because when we're broken, when my community is broken, divided and separated and hurting, our whole world is, we all are. We're because that extends out to community, that extends out to other people. If we're not healthy, nobody's healthy. And I have a few things that, you know, I have managed to accomplish in my life since I've been out of prison, but I still will never forget the day that I was able to vote. And I know that there are so many people, even, and I think strongly about the states that actually will not allow people just with plain felonies to vote. So being in California after a time span, and then parole, there are differences in parole. There's parole when you're coming from a state prison where you'll get that 3 to 5 years, but you may be able to get off early, like a year or so, like I was able to do. But for the most part, the folks are just continuing to go in and out. And then there's the federal parole where folks for 5 to 10 years won't be able to vote. And because mass incarceration, the numbers are like in the hundreds of thousands of people nationally that are incarcerated, that's another form of voter suppression. And it does not help to have that. And it hurts a whole lot of people who are actually trying to overcome their struggles and to be a part of something very important. One of the things that I take pride in when I talk to people about registering to vote and about voting rights, because so many people want to make excuses and say, well, especially some that can actually just run and register and vote, is that the attack on the vote. And that's what I look at when I think about community organizing and the opposition. I think about the way that they come for us. That's what I do. I think about the way and the angle that they use and the tactics that they use to come for us and their point of contact, and for them to come for our vote in such a way where mailboxes are being moved around and you're taking money from post offices. And when you for me, when I see that says something to me. That lets me know that my vote is the most powerful tool that I can use to be a part of democracy. I'm a published author today. I've been helping like other women just from the heart, with whatever it is that I can to help them find themselves and build relationships with their children. I had to overcome that fear. I had to overcome the reluctance to open my mouth when I was in a room, in a place where I could advocate for my people, because I was so intimidated.
So Lisa,
yes.
like, excuse me to interrupt. So if you had one, you know, you had one thing to say about the 50,000 people who should be eligible to vote, if this law passes, who would be eligible to vote?
If this law passes, there will be so many. So say for instance, we have 100,000 people in the US that are on parole, that are getting out of prison. They will immediately be able to go and participate in their communities in ways that they never thought possible. They will be able to go register to vote and play a role in democracy. There are organizations, so many of us that are working with formerly incarcerated people and people that are coming home to help them understand what that means. There's Initiate Justice, and I just graduated from that program, that training that is doing organizing and helping people organize inside a prison so that when they come home, they can play their role in democracy and we can get changes, help make changes happen. And when we go against that opposition, we're doing it together. And it will ultimately change the whole paradigm. It'll shift so much in our communities if we can vote, because of suppression of the vote. And our right to vote is constantly being taken away from us, or just utterly just under attack, then it minimizes the power that we possess when we can actually put our hands on a ballot. And it'll change their lives. It changed my life. It gave me such hope. It was like I had stepped into a whole nother place when I was able to participate. And so I'm just, want to help you understand how important it is, and to look at why the vote is under attack, and how there are folks like me that are coming home who are ready to do positive things in their lives, and it will help them to pull away from some of those negative things that happen when they don't have the resources and the support that they need.
Okay,
That's it.
okay, Lisa, thank you very much for sharing with us. And we feel the passion of your voice. And at this time, if you have any questions for Lisa, for Lisa, I think Gayla, my colleague, is going to navigate this part.
I think we'll just, actually, Larry, I think we can hold the questions for all three propositions so we can hear from the other speakers and then come back to the questions.
Okay, great. Next, we're going to move to Proposition 20, no on protect criminal justice reform. We are pleased to have with us Jay Vasquez, who's a member of the No on Prop 20 statewide coalition direct action committee. And this time we're going to allow Jay to come and to enlighten us on Prop 20.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jay Vasquez, he, him, his. I'm the Participatory Defense and Policy Coordinator for an organization called Communities United for Restorative Justice based in Oakland. and also a member of the No on Prop 20 statewide coalition. So what Proposition 20 is, it's a prison spending scam, plain and simple. What it would do would roll back several of the most recent reforms that California has made, such as the Public Safety Realignment Act of 2011, the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act of 2014, and the Public Safety and Rehabilitation Act of 2016. It would seek to take us back to the days of mass incarceration. The estimates are that it would incarcerate more than 10,000 people every single year. And it would, even the most conservative estimates say that it will cost the state taxpayers tens of millions of dollars per year, with some estimates reaching as high as $460 million. So it makes absolutely no sense at a time where the California crime rate just recently reached a historic low. And so it doesn't make sense to try to take us back to the days of mass incarceration. History has shown us that that does not work. As a matter of fact, it makes our communities less safe when we just incarcerate people and take away the rehabilitative incentives that are available to people that are behind prison walls, which is another component of what Prop 20 would do. It would take away some of the rehabilitative incentives for certain individuals inside prison. And so what it is, it's just another way to over-criminalize, particularly Black and brown communities. It would lower, one of the things it would do, it will lower the threshold for felony theft to just $250. That means that a youth that steals a bicycle or a pair of designer jeans or a pair of Air Jordans could go to prison. It would allow people convicted of misdemeanors such as shoplifting and drug possession to be required to submit to DNA testing. So it's just, there's so many wrong things with this policy. It's just bad policy to, in the direction that California is going with smart reforms, how we approach our communities that are infested with crime, and how we help the person that has been caught up in that rehabilitate. And so there's so many different reforms that are inside prison right now that help people do that. And Prop 20 would seek to roll back those gains and take us back to the era of mass incarceration. We peaked at 173,000 right now. It's just dipped below 100,000 people for the first time in 3 decades. So it just makes no sense why we want to flood the prisons, specifically in a time of a COVID-19 pandemic. Just yesterday, the 68 person died from COVID-19 in a California prison. And so it's just spreading like wildfire in there, and it just makes no sense to flood those prisons back with people for stealing a pair of Air Jordans or a bicycle. So yeah, Prop 20 is really bad policy, especially in this time of smart criminal justice reform and trying to take our state in the right direction. And so for those reasons, it's just bad policy. And there's a lot of misinformation out there. What it would do it would siphon funding from trauma recovery centers, which is why the Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, as well as the National Center for Victims of Crime, the California Domestic Violence Partnership, they all oppose Prop 20 because it would take some of that funding and reallocate that to just warehousing people inside our carceral system. It's still a broken system, and this would just take us back to those days where it's just even worse. From personal experience, I was incarcerated during the height of mass incarceration. I was there when they had triple bunks. I mean, you had people, those bunks were like, the space in them was so small, it's like a coffin. They had converted the gymnasiums to pack people in there like sardines. The medical care, they couldn't keep up with medical care because they just didn't have the capacity to give people the medical care they needed because there were so many prisoners and so little staff and equipment. They just didn't have the capacity to do that. So Prisoners were dying on average almost daily, which is why the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that it was cruel and unusual punishment under the Eighth Amendment, and they required California state prison population to decrease to about 37.5% capacity, which is still over, it's still over 100% capacity even now at its 30-year low. So it just makes no sense that the prison system right now is about 10, 11,000 over design capacity right now. And you're talking about adding at the minimum 10,000 new people every single year for crimes such as theft for $250. I mean, it's just bad policy all the way around. It's bad for our communities, and it's bad for the future of California. And I can stop there.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing that with us. And we're going to have someone else who's going to share their little story, their personal testimony in terms of how Prop 20 impact folk and will lead to, again, the repopulation of our state prison. I want to welcome Jamil, and he's going to talk to us about that.
Good morning, everybody. First, I would just like to thank Reverend Foy and Reverend Beverly for allowing me the space to have a little discussion today, and all the guests that are viewing this webinar that's presently here and perhaps watch it later on recording. Just a quick little bio about myself. So at the age of 20, I was a witness to a murder, and out of fear, I did not report that murder, and I was sentenced for accessory for first-degree murder and was sentenced with life without the possibility of parole. Now, personally, Prop 47 would not help me because my crime was violent just in nature. But what I would like to talk about is how Prop 57 affected me, because when I earned a commutation under Governor Brown and reduced my sentence from life without to life with the possibility of parole, making the decision to rehabilitate when rehabilitation would not help me in any way initially. So getting an education while behind bars, taking vocational classes, self-help classes, true rehabilitation, conflict resolution, stuff like that, to help me personally, and in the never hopes of gaining any type of credit to be released early. I started that journey just for self-improvement, to have, to earn, become a better person, and to prove to the courts when they sentenced me that that I was redeemable. Because one of the things I remember during my trial was that my crime was so heinous that a person like me could never change, right? And when we're dealing with Prop 47 and Prop 57 and all the good things that it brought about, it gave men and women inside the walls a hope, right? It gave them an incentive to better themselves, to earn those credits and earn their freedom to come home earlier. So I just want to say that that no matter what the crime is, whether your sentence is 16 months or 25 to life or life without deposit parole, that everybody has a chance to redeem themselves. And as long as there's measures in place where rehabilitation can truly happen. And to repeal, roll back Prop 47 and 57 will be a crime. I believe that we are headed in the right direction in true prison reform. There are many things that we still need to work on, but truly I would like to say that I'm a testimony that change is possible, redemption is possible, and if mercy is given in many ways, people would actually hold on to that and work and become better people. So yes, please vote no on Proposition 20, because we know that if you make these misdemeanors into wobblers, most likely the community that it would affect the most are the minority community, and we can't have that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamil. Make sure that you put your questions in the chat box so that we can have a Q&A, and that will come after our last speaker and on Proposition 25. I want to introduce to you former state senator Rod Wright. He was a state senator in the 35th district, as well as the 25th district, and also formerly assemblyman for the 48th district in California. And so he's going to share with us and talk to us about replacing the cash bail system. And this is I'd have to say, a controversial proposition for many of us in the community. But I'm sure when you hear Senator Wright talk about the cash bail system, we will have more clarity about it. So I'd like to welcome Senator Wright to talk to us about Prop 25.
Thank you, Reverend Foy. A little bit of background. I am the only sitting legislator ever convicted of a residency violation in the history of California. While I was a senator and charged with a residency violation, which was in effect a perjury charge, I had to post bail. My bail was $50,000. Now, why I was not given an OR, it doesn't matter because, again, senator, assemblyman, president, you're still a black man in America, and you don't want to get it twisted. So I had to post bail so that I could continue with my life and not sit in jail. Bail is one of the things that happens in America where, again, you put up money to assure that you're going to come to court or, arguably that you won't commit another crime. But essentially, if you take in Los Angeles, where I'm more familiar, over half the people sitting in LA County Jail are there because they couldn't pay bail money. Not that they wouldn't have committed a crime. It's also leveraged as a way to make people plead guilty to things that they didn't do. So that you'll have a prosecutor say, if you plead guilty, you can go home tomorrow. Or if you plead guilty, you'll just get 2 years in prison. But if you don't, you're going to sit here for maybe 2 or 3 years before your trial takes place. So, one of the real tragic stories of bail is the story of a young man who was in New York named Khalif Browder. And if you've never seen that story, it will break your heart that a young man who stole a backpack was given bail. He was 15. His family didn't have the bail money. So he couldn't get out of jail for 2 years. Now, ultimately, the DA rejected the case, but because this young man wasn't a gang member, he got beat up every day. So then they had to put him in solitary confinement. And because he was not used to being in solitary confinement, he started crying, and then the guards beat him up every day. By the time Khalif Browder was released, he was so disturbed that he committed suicide at the age of 19 years old. That story done by, and I'll think of his name, Beyonce's husband, that movie produced by him just breaks your heart. But that story of Khalif Browder happens every day in California, where people are simply held, not because they wouldn't come to court, not because they would commit another crime, but simply because the prosecution leverages to get guilty pleas out of people who may not have even committed a crime. Now, Proposition 25 is a little bit of a fluke, right? Because the legislature passed a bill. Thank you, somebody put up Jay-Z's husband. Jay-Z is Beyonce's husband. I'm old. Again, I learned something today about pronouns, and now I'm learning about some of the hip hop artists because I'm in the John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Supremes and Temptations era. So so please pardon my age and my gray hair. But the challenge is that the legislature passed a bill, SB 10, that was done by Senator Hertzberg. And that bill essentially eliminates cash bail. So how did we get to Proposition 25? The bail bondsman circulated a petition that is called a referendum. What that means is that if you vote yes for Prop 25, you're saying that SB 10 should go into effect. If you vote no, then SB 10 is repealed and we go back to what we currently have. Now, if you said to me, is SB 10 perfect? No, but we have to be careful that you don't allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. Yes, I could say I don't necessarily want a computerized system of assessing whether or not you're good for bail. But I can tell you that there are a couple of states that do this. It works fine. Could we narrow it down some? Possibly. There's another thing that you will hear people say, that if this passes, that it becomes a amendment to the Constitution because it was voted on. That's not true. The only thing you're voting on is whether or not SB 10 becomes law. It is not a constitutional amendment, and SB 10 can be amended by the legislature if there are problems as it moves forward. A no vote essentially returns this back to what the bail bondsmen do. And again, it is such a challenge, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to LA County Jail, which is also the largest mental institution in the United States, and you realize that people are sitting in jail simply because they're poor. There's an old Gil Scott line that says, poverty is the crime for which they do time. Thanks, ma'am, for the dime. And you, sir. The challenge that we again face is that we need to move past bail. Washington, D.C. does not have bail. This system works there. Even Kentucky does not have bail. This system works there. So we know that these systems can work. There is no reason for people to sit in jail, miss work, and be driven into poverty. And what really, really breaks your heart is that, let's say for the sake of discussion, that you pay the bail to get out. So let's say you get a $50,000 bail. You put up $5,000 so that you can come home. And then the next week, the DA rejects the case because you didn't commit a crime in the first place. You don't get your $5,000 back. What also happens in California every year is literally hundreds of people lose houses and cars because they posted their car or their house as collateral for the bail, and then they're not able to pay the bail and they lose it. And what really is tragic, again, is that when you post bail and the case is rejected by the DA, you don't get your money back. I would encourage everyone to vote yes on Proposition 25. Is it perfect? No. Is it better than what we have? It's 1,000 times better than what we have. The only people who benefit from this current system are the bail bondsmen, and they're vultures. And we should not allow them to continually feed off poor people in California. This only applies to California, but we should not allow those greedy vultures, as bail bondsmen, to feed off of people who in some cases may not have done anything more tragic than missing bail, than missing court for a traffic ticket. Please vote yes on Proposition 25.
Thank you, Senator Wright. And we're going to turn to Gayla and then have our Q&A.
Yes. Thank you all for the speakers and sharing both your personal testimony and your experience and all of your community organizing that you're doing. We have some questions for Proposition 17. So this would be for Lisa, James, and Reverend Foy. A question is, just to be really clear, what would Proposition 17 do? And are there any carve-outs for felonies that disqualify a person on parole from voting if Proposition 17 were to pass? So what would it do if it passes, and are there any carve-outs that would disqualify some people on parole?
That would be a question for Dr. Foy. Because to my knowledge, when you're on parole, it's just based on you being on parole that you can't vote in California. That's California. There are different, for other states that are even more harsh, just based on you having felonies. But that was a fear for me, that I thought that maybe my conviction wouldn't allow me to vote, even if I could, even if I did get off parole. But to my knowledge, it's just as long as you're on parole and off probation, then you cannot vote if you're on parole. But if you're on probation, you can, but on parole, you can't. And I've never heard of any carve outs in regard to the type of felony or the type of conviction. Now, I don't know if that language is in the bill, but Dr. Floyd might be able to answer it.
Yeah, what it will do is that it makes 50,000 people who are currently on parole and who have been released from prison but currently on parole, they will be eligible to vote. Jay may add something to that as well.
Oh, yeah, so there's no carve outs, first of all. And the reason I'm very familiar with it, because I'm disenfranchised because of that right now. So I can't vote because I'm on parole. So yes, right now there's actually 57,000 people that are on active parole in California, and it will re-enfranchise those people that are out here, such as myself, working, paying taxes. I volunteer in the community. I'm a full-time college student. So I'm striving to do everything right, but yes, my voice is not heard. So that's what Prop 17 would do. It would re-enfranchise people such as myself to be able to have a voice in my community, and be able to have a say on how my tax dollars are spent. So yeah, it's going to affect 57,000 people. There are no carve-outs. Parole is not part of the prison sentence. The California Supreme Court has ruled that. Parole is part of the reintegration phase. So if we're going to reintegrate people back into the community successfully, part of that is getting them involved in having them a stake in their community, which is why Prop 17 is so very important. And so it just makes a lot of sense to say yes on 17. 19 other states already allow people on parole to vote, plus the District of Columbia. And in every single one of those states that allow parolees to vote, they have lower crime rates. Because it shows that when people are having an investment and stake in their communities, they're less likely to commit crimes. So Prop 17 will also make our communities safer.
Great. Thank you for that, Jay. And there's another question for Prop 20 that I'll put towards you. There was a question about who's behind Proposition 20? Who put that on the ballot?
Yeah, it's Assembly Member Jim Cooper. He's a former sheriff. He spent 30 years as Sacramento County Sheriff. He is the person that got it to where it is now. And so yeah, Assembly Member Jim Cooper is the main proponent behind Proposition 20, and it's backed by prison guards, police unions, and a lot of other people that have a stake in mass incarceration.
Thank you, Jay. Now I have a few questions about Proposition 25. The first one is, what is the risk assessment that is being proposed that would replace the cash bail? How is that risk determined? Who gets to impose it? And explain that the cash bail can still be imposed for egregious crimes.
Okay, a couple of things. In SB 10, there would be no cash bail. So you would either go to jail or you would go home. There's not a cash bail. Now, the risk assessment is a system where you look at things like, does this person have a job? How old is this person? You look at, how many other crimes have they committed? Is there a possibility that they would flee the country? I mean, it's the same system that we currently use when someone receives what's called an OR, or own recognizance, which a lot of people do. It's just that most of them aren't people of color. So the risk assessment, and one of the arguments that people have attempted to make, is that the risk assessment could be biased. And you know what? There's some truth that I can't say that there isn't. In Washington, D.C., where they do this, that has not been the case. In Kentucky, where they do this, that has not been the case. Can I say with 100% certainty that that there would not be bias in the risk assessment process? I can't. I can tell you that there's 100% certainty that if we continue with cash bail, that thousands of people will be sitting in jail simply because they were poor. And being poor should not be reason for you to have to go to jail.
Great. Thank you, Senator Rod. And there's one more statement about Proposition 25 that I'll just read with a question, and you can feel free to respond to it. On Proposition 25, how does giving millions of dollars to courts and probation departments with automated racial profiling algorithms decarcerate? There are better approaches to eliminating cash bail in the Alternatives to Incarceration Roadmap adopted by the LA County Board of Supervisors, along with Justice LA, Dignity and Power, and La Defensa.
Well, and again, if you asked me, do I think that SB 10 which is what we're talking about, do I think SB 10 is perfect? No, I don't. Could there be some racial profiling in the risk assessment? Yes, there can. Are there risk assessments in the current system? Yes, there are. So the difference between the risk assessment that we currently have and the risk assessment that you could get in SB 10 is that your wallet would be a lot healthier, because now you face a risk assessment that could cost you thousands of dollars. If there's a risk assessment that occurs under SB 10, it doesn't cost you thousands of dollars to get there. Will people go to jail? Yes, there'll be some people who go to jail. Will there be more people who go to jail? Absolutely not, because the idea of this is to not have people go to jail in the same numbers that we were doing now. Most people would not go to jail. Again, could a system be rigged in a way that is not good? Absolutely it can. One of the other things about legislation I can tell you is that if in a couple of years we look at this and we see that there's discrimination, or if we see that it's being abused, the beauty of SB 10 is that you can amend it and you can make changes. So this is a start, it's not the beginning. But again, you don't want to let the perfect become the enemy of the good. If I look at Washington, D.C., if I look at Kentucky and a couple of other states that have done this, what's being described has not taken place. So yeah, yes, you'll put some money into probation. You might have some people who end up with an ankle bracelet. Again, we'll have to look at all of that. We'll have to make sure going forward that this is not the end of this whole system. And we'll have to make adjustments as we go along. But if you don't start with something, if you don't make the change, if you surrender to the bail bond industry, then you'll have what you currently have, which is clearly bad for everyone. The story of Khalif Browder should ring clear to everyone as to what's wrong with a money cash bail system.
Great. Thank you, Senator Rod. So I just wanted, before we move on, to share a bit about the other four propositions. I just wanted to see if there were any other last comments from Lisa James or Jay Vasquez before we move to the other propositions.
I just want to thank everybody for showing up, and these are very, very important propositions. So I hope everybody really takes a look at them and see that they're going to affect a lot of people, either in a positive way or a negative way, but specifically Black and brown people. So just please take a look at them, and I wish I was out there able to vote, but hopefully you guys go out there and make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
I'm sorry, my camera went out. So I just want to say thank you, just for the opportunity to be able to share my story and how, my voting rights being restored, how it impacted my life, and that, you consider how this ultimately builds not just, a person, the person, but the family in our community. And I think that everyone's has a right to vote. I just believe that that's a part of democracy, and that it can ultimately change so much in so many positive directions. And I just hope that when you get the opportunity to click on some of the links and learn a little bit more about it, and about how to get involved and support, that you take advantage of those opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to share some of those resources that you mentioned to encourage folks to continue to do their research. And I want to just bring back Reverend Larry Foy to make a plug for Measure J.
Yeah, Measure J is a LA County measure that actually will set aside 2% of the county's budget for reinvestment to communities. And the beauty about this is that the 10% set aside forbids law enforcement from attaching itself to these monies. Practically every measure in our proposition that has been designed and implemented to reinvest monies back into the communities, communities that have been harmed somehow or another. Law enforcement has been able to access those dollars. But this particular measure will prevent that. But again, it's going back into the communities or to rebuild those communities that have been unduly harmed by mass incarceration. So that means mental health, that means drug treatment centers, and so forth.
Thanks, Larry. So now I'm just going to share briefly about the other 4 propositions that we have taken a stand on. These are the other 4 propositions that we believe also align with our values, using some of that criteria that Reverend Deborah lifted up in the beginning on our emphasis on how are we investing in and restoring communities. So that's Proposition 15, 16, and 21 that we're endorsing, as well as a no position on Proposition 22. I'm going to share just briefly about these propositions and how they align with our work, but I won't be going into a lot of the details, and we'll have more links for other resources that you are invited to continue to read up on more at the end. Proposition 15, which is known as Schools and Communities First, would close corporate tax loopholes affecting the wealthiest corporations and would restore $12 billion annually in shared resources to our schools, community colleges, and local government services. Prop 15 also exempts homeowners, renters, small businesses, and agricultural land so that they can continue to be protected by previous law of Prop 13. Interfaith movement believes we must reinvest in communities. For too long, corporations in California have not had to pay their fair share in taxes. While schools have gone underfunded, teachers have been underpaid. By investing in our schools, especially those in the most vulnerable neighborhoods where many of the families we accompany are living, we are healing our communities. More resources in these schools, especially resources going towards culturally appropriate programs, installing restorative justice values, we hope will dismantle the school to prison to deportation pipeline. Proposition 16 on affirmative action, banning affirmative action. California is one of only 9 states that bans this practice of using affirmative action, a tool that helps us fight discrimination. Prop 16 is our chance to change that by ending this ban. And Prop 16 would allow public colleges, universities, and agencies to include race, sex, color, ethnicity, and country of origin as part of their decision-making. This would allow the creation of affirmative action programs to increase diversity. So interfaith movement, we believe we must mend the past by addressing these long-standing inequities and expand opportunities to people of color and to women. Gender and race-based discrimination has existed throughout our society and has created barriers for women and people of color to access higher education and employment. And we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Proposition 21. So currently existing law prevents local governments from using more aggressive rent control measures. Proposition 21 would allow cities to implement rent control for residential properties over 15 years old. We all know we are in a housing crisis with skyrocketing rent. And unfortunately, many immigrant communities and returning residents from incarceration, affordable and stable housing is one of the biggest barriers, as we heard earlier from Lisa James in her journey. Interfaith Movement believes affordable housing with rental control protection should be a basic human right. In addition, local government oversight of rent control measures allows decisions to be made at the level that impacts communities most directly. And the last proposition, Prop 22, is what we've taken a position of no. Last year, California passed a law, AB 5, to address the exploitation of workers and to address the misclassification of employees as independent contractors. So Prop 22 is an attempt to exempt Uber, Lyft, and other app-based companies from this existing law. With Prop 22, gig workers would lose state mandated protections for employees, such as minimum wage, overtime, unemployment insurance, and workers' comp. Interfaith Movement has a worldview that seeks an equitable economy where workers get a living wage that can provide them with security for them and their families. An economy that places respect and care at the forefront. All workers deserve benefits, worker protections, sick leave, and unemployment insurance. And we want work to be treated equitably and for work to support life. So those are the 4 propositions that are also in our voter guide. So the call to action, we just wanted to also share important resources that both the Voter's Edge is a very comprehensive guide to look at all the different propositions and candidates that will be on your ballot. If you haven't seen that resource, we highly recommend looking at it and sharing it. We've also put in links to 2 other organizations that we've partnered with, California Immigrant Policy Center, if you want to learn more about the immigrant perspective on the propositions I shared, and East Bay Housing Organizations, which has a really good resource on Proposition 21. And these links will go into the chat as well. And because this is such an unusual time in the world with COVID, and many of our civil liberties seem to be stripped away by the day, we want folks to be very aware of the dates and for people to know, have they registered? How can they register? So there's a lot of links here as well. Just to know that online registration ends on October 19th, but there is same-day registration that will happen afterwards until the election. People should really research what their options are for voting and their local polling places, and that varies by county. So again, we'll put these links in the notes and send that and send it out for folks to share, especially for if most of you on this call are kind of already know what your resources are in your county. We just encourage you to share this information with others so that everyone knows how they can vote. A big suggestion is that you all make a plan of how you will plan to vote. We included a few links to the ACLU that kind of gives you a checklist to make sure you know all the things that you should consider. And one link specifically in Southern California as well, because the counties down there in Southern California each have their own voting guidelines and considerations. And last, I'm just going to share a testimony. This will be from Liz Ponce, who is a community leader, a community member. You see her on the left with her daughter, standing outside when they were advocating for the release of her husband and another loved one in detention. And you see her whole family on the right at another action advocating for the release of others that are inside prison. So Liz has a video testimony to share with us.
I'm a U.S. citizen, and I was born and raised in the Napa Valley. I grew up surrounded by vineyards and trees in a small rundown cabin up on the hillside. My father, who immigrated here from Mexico in the late 70s, made his living working in the vineyards. Growing up, I remember rarely leaving the property where we lived. When we did, it was usually only on Sundays to go to church and buy groceries. Because of this, when I went to school, I did not know English, and my teachers did not know Spanish. School was hard and frustrating. If it was hard for me, I imagine it was harder for my parents. This was probably why they never attended school functions, enrolled us in sports, or any extracurricular activities. What I later found out was although the language was one of the reasons, another reason was that they had no legal status. They knew ICE would regularly conduct raids in the city of Napa. This is why they chose to live in the hills and stayed on private property as much as possible. I was clueless for most of my youth as to the true severity of the fear they had of deportation. My parents eventually obtained legal status because of the 1986 Immigration Reform Amnesty Bill. Although I grew up seeing my dad involved and advocating and always being active in the community, he wasn't a U.S. citizen and he could not vote. But he always encouraged me to do and cared enough to change the discriminating laws that affected our community. I always admired that about my dad, but sadly this wasn't something I cared to do at the time. When he passed away, I completely lost all interest or push to get involved in political issues. It wasn't until 2018 when my husband was picked up by ICE at our home. That's the day I decided to get involved and seek change. It sparked an interest. Until this point in time, I had kept secret my husband's legal status. The last thing I wanted to do was speak out and bring attention to me or my family. I knew speaking out about his arrest would cause some negative backlash, and I felt embarrassed about the whole situation. Yet, I also knew the need to warn others that ICE was conducting arrests in Napa, a sanctuary city. This just did not seem right. This should not be allowed. Armando spent over 2 years in an immigration detention center, and although he finally is at home, his civil immigration case is still not over. My firsthand knowledge has helped me help others who are going through the similar situation. I now feel like I must speak up for others who cannot. I am lucky to have been born here and able to speak out without the fear of deportation. I know many still are embarrassed like I was about openly speaking about someone in their family living here illegally, and that's okay. But I strongly encourage all who can to vote. Read what is on the ballot, discuss these issues as a family, get involved, because voting for my family is not just about me. I vote for all those I know who can not. I vote for people like my husband or my daughter who will be benefited by Prop 16 if it passes. Don't wait until immigration is knocking at your door or your neighbor's door to get involved. Don't look the other way and take for granted the gift of citizenship given to you by your family. Thank you.
And again, that was Liz Ponce, who's been a community leader working with us for the last couple of months. And as you saw her husband sitting next to her, he is home, which is something they were fighting for. Last, we do want to invite you to our monthly vigil, which will be in 2 weeks and will be led by Reverend Larry Foy, and the theme will be the sacredness of the vote. So join us 2 weeks from today on October 16th. And with that, I just want to thank all of our speakers and the staff of the organization and all of you for being with us. For this hour and a half, we'll be sharing a link to the recording as well as a link to the slides. So you'll have these resources that we encourage you to share it as well. So thank you all.